Welcome back everybody, I'm Gérann Gerber, your host, and today I'm going to react to a video called Thrawn's Campaign, How He Nearly Broke the New Republic, a Star Wars documentary. Now for new updates and content, you can visit the links in the description down below, and let's get started. Enjoy.
Without a superweapon or the Emperor's resources, Grand Admiral Thrawn used only a fractured fleet, a stolen cloning facility, and an unstable Dark Jedi clone to bring the New Republic closer to collapse than anything since the Death Star. The Empire he inherited was broken, the Republic he targeted was fragile, and the campaign he designed attacked both at once: military, political, economic, and psychological, in ways no one on either side had seen before. Within a year of returning, he captured an entire lost fleet, crippled the Republic's supply lines, neutralized its supreme commander through political sabotage, and placed the capital world of Coruscant under invisible siege. He did all of it with inferior numbers, and an understanding of his enemies that ran deeper than anything they had of him. Three things stopped him, and none of them came from a battlefield. Every detail is drawn from the Legends Thrawn trilogy, and by the time they broke, no one, not even Thrawn, saw it coming. Chapter 1. Thrawn's Method. When the Chimera intercepted a Republic task force early in the campaign, the engagement was over in minutes. Thrawn had launched a Marg Sabel closure maneuver, an unstructured, chaotic attack profile designed to overwhelm an enemy's ability to respond in an organized way. Most commanders would have opened with a standard formation, line abreast, or a pincer to envelop. Thrawn did the opposite. He sent his ships in at asymmetric angles, each on a different attack vector, with no visible coordination between them. To a disciplined commander, it looked like a mistake. To an Illumined commander, it was a nightmare. The Republic force shifted into a defensive formation that Thrawn recognized immediately, and Elam was commanding that force, he told Captain Pellaeon. And Illumin simply could not handle the unstructured attack profile of a properly executed Marg Sabel. Their species' psychology demanded order. When confronted with chaos, they defaulted to the one rigid defensive pattern their minds would allow. And that pattern was exactly what Thrawn had designed his attack to break. They were trying the only defense their technology allowed, and it was useless. Thrawn had known it would be before the first shot was fired. The Imperial fleet was not stronger. Thrawn had simply identified the one response his opponent could not help but make, and built his attack to punish it. Pellaeon had served under commanders who relied on firepower, numbers, and brutality to win. He had never seen a commander read an enemy's psychology from their first defensive response and design an attack to exploit it in the same breath. You could reinforce a position, but you cannot reinforce a species' psychology. That was the difference. And when Pellaeon first entered Thrawn's private command chamber, he began to understand where it came from. It was an art museum. The walls and dome ceiling were covered with paintings and planets, most of alien origin. Sculptures stood on pedestals around the room. A double circle of repeater displays showed still more artwork. The outer ring, slightly higher than the inner, all devoted to images of alien creative work. Thrawn's explanation was simple. When you understand a species' art, you understand that species. Not their technology or their fleet composition, but their psychology, the patterns they cannot help but repeat under pressure. Standard military doctrine assumed you could study an enemy's fleet, predict their options, and prepare accordingly. Thrawn made that approach obsolete. He attacked where his enemies were psychologically incapable of responding effectively, and because that vulnerability was built into the species commanding each sector's defense, there was no training program, no fleet upgrade, and no strategic redeployment that could fix it. The Republic would have to change its commanders' minds to counter Thrawn, and you cannot order someone to think differently. Once he proved it worked, he stopped testing it and started using it. But the method alone could not save an empire that was running out of time. Thrawn commanded barely a quarter of the Empire's former territory. The officer corps was gone, lost at Endor, along with the Super Star Destroyer Executor and some of the best officers in the fleet. What remained was a fleet of young conscripts with fragile morale and thin experience, many of them conscripted from their home worlds by force or threat of force. They had no institutional memory of what the Empire had been at its height, and no experience serving under competent leadership. The Empire's scarcest resource was time. Every month that passed without a decisive campaign was a month the Republic used to consolidate its hold on the galaxy's core systems. So Thrawn went looking for tools the Republic did not know existed, and he found them on the planet Wayland, buried inside Mount Tantus, the Emperor's private storehouse. An experimental cloaking shield that could render a ship completely invisible to all sensors. Pellaeon noted that the device had cost enormous sums the Empire could not spare. Thrawn spent the money anyway. 20,000 Sparty cloning cylinders capable of producing a fully grown clone soldier every 15 to 20 days. Previous cloning attempts had produced madness, a side effect of the Force interacting with the accelerated growth process. But Thrawn solved this with Isalmiri, creatures that push back the Force, creating stable soldiers at an industrial scale, and Jerus Sabaoth, a clone of a Jedi Master who had been guarding the mountain for decades. Thrawn recruited him as a Force user asset, promising to deliver Luke Skywalker and Leia Organa Solo's unborn twins in exchange for cooperation. The clone could coordinate fleet operations through the Force, making Imperial task forces fight with a cohesion that should have been impossible for their experience level. For a fleet of young conscripts, that coordination was the difference between competent and devastating. But Sabaoth was not simply unstable, he was dangerous. Pellaeon had already seen the clone seize control of the Chimera's bridge crew through the Force, locking every officer at their station with a thought. Thrawn kept the Ysalamiri on the bridge to neutralize him when necessary, but both men understood the arrangement was temporary. Early in the campaign, Luke Skywalker was lured to the planet Merkur and captured, removing the Republic's only trained Jedi during a critical window. Without Luke, the Republic lost its most capable field operative and its only counter to Sabaoth's Force abilities. The gap his absence created gave Thrawn room to operate without interference from the one adversary who could sense what conventional intelligence could not. Thrawn now had a method, an army, a cloaking device, a Force user, and a galaxy full of enemies who did not know any of it existed. His first target was the one place the Republic believed was untouchable. Chapter 2. The Sluice Von Gambit. Thrawn opened his campaign with a heist, not a bombardment. The Sluice Von shipyards were one of the New Republic's most important fleet servicing facilities, located roughly 30 light-years away from the Biffash system. At any given time, roughly 100 capital ships sat in its docking bays, many of them undermanned, pulled in for repair and maintenance on Admiral Akbar's orders. The shipyards were considered one of the most heavily defended positions in Republic space. Between the Republic's own star cruisers and the Sluice's permanent battle stations, the conventional wisdom was that no Imperial commander would risk an attack. Leia herself had said as much. She noted the defenses and concluded that any Imperial leader with a gram of sense would think twice before tackling it. She was right about every other Imperial leader, but wrong about Thrawn. Before the main operation, he launched a series of raids across the Republic's border systems that the Republic read as standard Imperial aggression. The raids tested Sabaoth's ability to coordinate under combat conditions, diverted Republic attention to the wrong sectors, and established a rhythm of low-level attacks that made intelligence analysts complacent. Every ship the Republic moved to cover the border raids was a ship that was not at Sluice Von. Thrawn emphasized to Pellaeon that the Sluice Von operation was not simply one battle among many. It was the beginning of the entire victory campaign against the rebellion. He would not allow so complex and far-reaching a schedule to be altered. Not for Skywalker, not for anyone else. Thrawn even timed the strike to a biological vulnerability. He had identified a biannual cycle in the Sluice species, the aliens who staff the shipyard's control systems, during which they become measurably more sluggish. Sluice art clearly indicated this cyclic pattern, and Thrawn intended to hit them at their most vulnerable point. The attack relied on the cloaking shield. A modified freighter rendered completely invisible to all sensors was positioned in deep space outside the Sluice Von system. The technology had never been tested in a live operation. If it failed, the freighter would be detected, the element of surprise lost, and the entire operation wasted. Thrawn accepted the risk. When the moment came, the cloaking shield activated cleanly. The invisible freighter jumped to light speed and arrived in the Sluisvan system undetected. Inside it were approximately 40 TIE fighters and 50 mole miners, small automated boring machines originally designed for asteroid mining. The cloaked freighter delivered its payload directly into the shipyard perimeter. The moment the cloak dropped, the TIE fighters launched and engaged Republic defenders in a conventional dogfight, pulling attention, drawing fire, creating chaos in the crowded docking area where 100 capital ships sat in various states of repair. But the TIE fighters were the distraction. The mole miners were the real weapon. They attached themselves to the undermanned capital ships and began boring through hull plating, cutting their way to bridge controls. Sluisvan's traffic control was a mix of Sluicy and Republic personnel, and the confusion of a surprise attack inside a packed shipyard created exactly the kind of disorder Thrawn needed. Docking bay crews scrambled to seal airlocks, communication channels overloaded with conflicting reports, some stations reporting hull breaches, others reporting boarding actions, others still insisting the attack was limited to the TIE fighter engagement outside the perimeter. By the time the defenders understood what was happening, Imperial operatives were already inside multiple capital ships, working to take control of their systems. The Republic's defense commanders were fighting the TIE fighters, the visible threat, while the real operation was happening silently, ship by ship, beneath the hull plating. The objective was capture, not destruction, steal the Republic's fleet, and flip the naval balance in a single operation. The plan came within minutes of succeeding. Lando Calrissian, present at Sluisvan for unrelated repairs, was one of the few people in the shipyard who understood what the mole miners actually were. He had used them in his own mining operations. When he recognized the boring patterns on the capital ship's hulls, he realized the Empire was not trying to destroy the fleet, it was trying to steal it. And he figured out the one counter no one at the Republic's strategic level had prepared. He activated the mole miners on the ships the Empire was already hijacking, causing enough additional internal damage to disable them. The Republic kept its fleet, but the ships were wrecked in the process. Thrawn did not get his armada. His response reveals something about how he operated. When intelligence reached him during the battle that Talon Card, a smuggling chief who had been doing business with the Empire, had aided the Republic, Thrawn's anger was real, but brief. The Sluisvan operation was the primary concern at the moment, he told Pelion. Battles had been lost over the presence or absence of a single ship, so Card and his disloyalty could wait. The campaign always came first. Sluisvan proved Thrawn's entire design worked. The only variable he had not accounted for was one man making an improvised decision under fire. The Republic did not lose its fleet, but it learned something worse. It was not safe anywhere. Chapter 3: Breaking the Republic. Thrawn's next target was the New Republic's government itself. The New Republic, barely a few years old, was not yet a functioning state. It was a coalition held together by shared purpose and a handful of leaders who had survived the war. The Provisional Council made decisions, but its authority was contested and its legitimacy uncertain. Mon Mothma had identified the core problem in terms that cut through every other debate. The galaxy was waiting for the New Republic to become a real government, to formally re-establish the principles and law of the Old Republic. That was the first and primary task. Until it was accomplished, everyone was hedging their bets. From member worlds to the smuggling community, where Han Solo's efforts to recruit groups into legitimate shipping roles met refusal after refusal. The deeper issue was trust. No one was sure the Republic would last long enough to keep its promises. The deepest fault line ran between Admiral Ackbar and Councillor Borsk Falia of the Bothan faction. Falia had been jockeying for power since the day he joined the Alliance, and had parlayed the Bothan spies' discovery of the second Death Star into a council seat. Ackbar considered Falia's political maneuvering a dangerous waste of time, and had never bothered to hide that opinion. The rivalry was personal, institutional, and exactly the kind of fracture Thrawn could exploit. Leia understood better than most how dangerous this tension was. Without her own political training, learned in the Royal House of Alderaan, practiced in the Imperial Senate as a teenager, the entire New Republic could easily collapse in its critical early stages. She was, in a very real sense, a single point of failure for the government's political infrastructure, and she was spending her time on diplomatic missions to marginal systems while pregnant, because no one else had the expertise to do it. Instead of attacking the Republic's military, Thrawn attacked the fault line between its military and its politicians. Thrawn planted ambiguous financial evidence that merely suggested Ackbar was corrupt. His reasoning was exact. A slower, messier scandal would send ripples of uncertainty through the rebellion's entire political system. At its best, it could split the alliance apart. Ackbar was replaceable. The delicate political balance was not. Thalia took the bait precisely as Thrawn predicted. After the near loss at Sluzvan, he accused Ackbar of either serious misjudgment or outright treason. He argued that the capital ships sitting at Sluzvan, undermanned and vulnerable, had been placed there on Ackbar's orders. He pointed to the compromised communications as evidence of security failures under Ackbar's watch. He took over some of Ackbar's internal security duties. He hinted broadly that he would be available to take charge of Supreme Command. The effect rippled outward. Other council members who might have supported Ackbar hesitated, unwilling to stake their own positions on a commander who was suddenly under investigation. Alliance officers on active duty watched the political infighting and drew their own conclusions about how much support they could expect from their own government. Han recognized what was happening. Thalia was playing politics by Bothan rules. Someone looked bad, so you jumped on them. The problem was that no one else had jumped with him, which left Thalia exposed with his neck stuck out and his reputation on the line. He could not back down gracefully. The only way to salvage his prestige was to make sure Ackbar went down. Thrawn neutralized the New Republic's Supreme Commander without committing a single ship. The Republic's own politicians accomplished it for him. With Ackbar sidelined, defensive decisions that he would have made in hours took days as the interim command structure debated authority, consulted council members, and second-guessed itself. Fleet deployments that should have been routine became political negotiations. Officers in the field, watching their supreme commander drag through a political crisis while the Empire pressed the attack, drew their own conclusions about how much support they could expect from their own government. Some sector commanders began making independent defensive arrangements rather than waiting for orders that might never come, or might be compromised by the time they arrived. The Republic's command structure was not just slower, it was fragmenting. Leia saw what the political war was costing Ackbar even after the immediate crisis passed. The two-front battle, fighting the Empire while defending himself against his own council, was grinding him down. For all his military genius, Ackbar did not have the polish to be a good politician, and with Thalia nipping at his heels, he was becoming increasingly overprotective of his territory, making defensive decisions that played into his rival's hands. Thrawn had not needed to defeat Ackbar in battle. He had only needed to make Ackbar fight on two fronts at once. The Republic's leadership was being consumed by its own internal contradictions at the exact moment it needed unity most, and Thrawn had engineered that timing. Chapter 4: The Logistics War. Most people think wars are decided by battles. Thrawn understood that they are decided by production. His convoy raids along the Republic's border sectors were designed to force the Republic into a trap with no good exit. After each raid, the survivors would tell their story. Future convoys from those sectors would demand upgraded protection. The Republic would face the choice of either tying up large numbers of its ships with escort duty, or effectively abandoning cargo shipment through the border sectors entirely. Either option weakened the Republic's ability to sustain a coordinated defense, and the choice itself created a cascade. Worlds that lost their supply convoys began making their own arrangements with the Empire, smugglers, or anyone who could guarantee delivery. Some worlds began negotiating directly with Imperial governors for trade access, bypassing the Republic entirely. Every broken link made the next one easier to sever. He described this approach to Pelion in two words: economics and psychology. Thrawn preferred to leave civilian survivors after his raids. Fear was more useful than wreckage. Every survivor who made it home became an unpaid propaganda agent for the Empire. Talon Karrde understood this from the other side. After one such raid, he predicted the Republic's response with cold accuracy. Officials would bustle around, present a comforting display of force, and convince the locals it can never happen again. Every time the Republic diverted ships to this political theater, those ships were unavailable for actual defense, and the Republic had no choice but to keep doing it. A government that failed to respond to attacks on its citizens would lose legitimacy even faster than one that lost ships. Thrawn was exploiting the political cost of being a democracy at war. The cloning operation at Mount Tantus was transforming the campaign's fundamentals. The longer the facility operated, the wider the gap became. The Republic shipyards could produce vessels, but trained crews could not be manufactured at the same rate. Thrawn's forces could absorb losses that would have been fatal to any conventional fleet, because those losses could be replaced in weeks. Every engagement the Republic fought cost it irreplaceable ships and experienced officers. Every engagement the Empire fought cost it replaceable clones and expendable equipment. The math was simple and merciless. Time was on Thrawn's side. The war had shifted from a contest of strategy to a contest of production, and production favored the Empire. When his forces seized a world, it was converted into infrastructure. Pellaeon observed the pattern firsthand. Direct Imperial control of ground and space defenses came first, then the food distribution system, then processing facilities, then farming and livestock regions. In a very short time, the entire planet became nothing more than a supply depot for the Imperial war machine. The population that remained was not liberated or subjugated in the traditional sense. It was absorbed into the logistics chain. Farmers kept farming, factories kept producing. The only thing that changed was who received the output. Every world Thrawn seized made his campaign more self-sustaining and the Republic's response more difficult, because recapturing a converted world meant destroying the very infrastructure the Republic needed to recover. When Thrawn's forces took Ukio, one of the Republic's major food production centers, they captured its defenses intact and converted the entire planet into a supply depot. The Republic did not just lose a battle, but the capacity to feed a significant portion of its own military and population. And Ukio was not the only world to fall this way. Each seizure compounded the last. The Republic was not merely losing territory on a map, it was losing the capacity to sustain a war. And then, the war's arithmetic changed overnight. Somewhere in deep space, drifting since a hive virus killed their crews decades earlier, lay the Katana fleet. Roughly 200 Dreadnought-class heavy cruisers, slave-rigged to operate with 2,000 crew instead of the standard 16,000. Talon Card had stumbled across two of them years earlier during a botched smuggling run and kept the coordinates secret. But as the campaign escalated, both sides learned the fleet existed and both sides raced to claim it. Combined with clone troops from Mount Tantus, whoever reached the fleet first gained an instant armada. Thrawn dispatched the ship thief Niles Ferrier to locate them through the criminal underworld. The Empire secured the majority. Senator Garm Bel Iblis, who had been running his own private war against the Empire with 6 independently acquired dreadnoughts, represented the kind of fragmented resistance the Republic could draw on. But Bel Iblis had 6 ships. The Empire just gained nearly 200, and with the Sparty cylinders to crew them, every one of those dreadnoughts could be operational within weeks. Even Thrawn's logistics had limits. The Bilbringi shipyards were running critically low on key materials, and the supply chain was straining under the demands of a campaign fought across dozens of sectors simultaneously. But Thrawn's strain was manageable. The Republic's was not. One side had a renewable army, a growing fleet, and 200 new warships. The other was running out of ships, food, and the means to replace its losses. By the time the Republic realized what it was losing, it was not just territory, it was time. Chapter 5. Inside the Republic. For months, the Empire seemed to anticipate every move the Republic made. Convoys rerouted to avoid Imperial patrol routes would find Imperial ships waiting at the new coordinates. Diplomatic envoys sent to recruit neutral systems would arrive to find Imperial representatives already there, offering better terms. Defensive deployments were countered before they could be executed. Fleet movements planned in the palace were anticipated before the ships left dock. Every decision the Republic made seemed to reach the Empire before it could be carried out. Something was fundamentally compromised inside the Republic's own command structure, but no one could identify what. Mara Jade, a former Emperor's Hand who had been closer to the Imperial power structure than virtually anyone still alive, provided the most honest tactical assessment the Republic would receive, and it was essentially a declaration of futility. Thrawn had no patterns, no favored strategies, and no discernible weaknesses. He studied his enemies and tailored his attacks against their psychological blind spots. He did not overcommit his forces, and he was not too proud to back off when it was clear he was losing, which Mara noted did not happen very often. The Republic was not facing a commander with a flaw they could find and attack. It was facing a commander who had made eliminating his own weaknesses a matter of professional discipline. Leia Organa Solo's response revealed the only counter-strategy available. If they could identify the specific weaknesses Thrawn planned to exploit in them, they might anticipate the direction of his attack. It was a defensive posture by necessity, a bet that knowing their own vulnerabilities could compensate for knowing nothing about their enemy's methods. But the Republic's situation was worse than even Mara knew. For months, the Empire had not just been outthinking the Republic, it had been listening to it. The source was Delta Source, a listening device embedded in the Jahala trees that lined the corridors of the Imperial Palace on Coruscant. The trees were a holdover from the Emperor's time, kept as decoration. No one had thought to examine them. Every military briefing, every strategic planning session, every council debate conducted within range of those corridors was transmitted directly to Thrawn's intelligence apparatus. The Republic's own headquarters had become a listening post for the enemy. Han Solo estimated that between council members, their staff, prep crews at the spaceport, and various security and support personnel, up to 200 people had direct access to any given operational itinerary, and that did not count friends and colleagues any of those 200 might have mentioned it to. Tracking through all of them to find the leak would take time the Republic did not have. Republic intelligence knew something was wrong. The Empire's responses were too precise, too well timed. But conventional sweeps of the palace found nothing. The Jahala trees were organic and decorative. No one had thought to examine them. Luke Skywalker framed the scale of the problem clearly. As long as Delta Source was active, there were not many people they could trust. The Republic's entire command structure was compromised, and the handful of leaders who knew it could not use the compromised system to organize a response. Any plan discussed in the palace would reach Thrawn before the ships executing it left the dock. Any attempt to find Delta Source using palace-based resources risked alerting Thrawn to the search itself. The Republic needed to solve the problem outside the system that was compromised, but nearly all of its decision-making infrastructure was inside that system. Every secure room, every encrypted channel, every private meeting, all of it passed through corridors lined with Jahala trees. The Republic's own security protocols, designed to centralize sensitive communications in the most protected building on the planet, had turned the palace into the worst possible place to plan anything. The Republic was planning a war in a room the Empire had wired, and they did not know which room it was. The cloaking technology demonstrated at Sluice Von gave Thrawn something equally dangerous: the ability to insert threats into defended spaces before anyone knew they existed. The Republic could not detect what it cannot see, and Thrawn would soon apply that principle on a scale that made Sluice Von look like a rehearsal. There was no strategy the Republic could plan that Thrawn did not already know. Chapter 6: The Siege of Coruscant. Thrawn turned his attention to the Republic's capital. He did not launch a frontal assault on Coruscant. The Empire did not have the numbers for a direct attack, and it lacked the supply lines for a traditional siege. Sabaoth demanded an assault. It was the only thing the Mad Clone cared about, because Leia Organa Solo and her twins were there. Thrawn refused, for he possessed a weapon far more effective than bombardment. He besieged Coruscant with invisible asteroids. Cloaked rocks dropped into orbit above the planet forced the Republic to expend ships and energy firing into empty space at threats they could not confirm. The space above Coruscant became a firestorm of turbo-laser blasts and proton torpedoes, cutting through marked probability cones, zones where the invisible asteroids might be, based on computer calculations of their possible paths. Ships and battle stations shifted aim constantly as the computers recalculated. The Republic was shooting at math, not at targets. Every blast that struck empty space wasted energy. and every blast that missed a real asteroid risked catastrophe. And the calculations never stopped. As each asteroid moved, the probability cones expanded, requiring more ships to cover more space with less certainty. Vessels that should have been defending border sectors or escorting convoys were pinned above the capital, firing at ghosts. The Republic could not ignore the siege. A single asteroid impact on Coruscant would kill millions, but it cannot afford to keep feeding ships into an invisible threat while the rest of the galaxy burned. Thrawn did not need to destroy Coruscant. He needed its population and leadership to feel that destruction was possible at any moment, and that feeling cost him nothing. The citizens of Coruscant could look up and know that invisible rocks were falling towards their planet and that their government could not guarantee it would stop them all. Every day the siege continued without resolution. Confidence in the Republic eroded a little further. Admiral Ackbar was back in command. The political crisis Thrawn had engineered against him had eventually resolved, but not cleanly. Ackbar had been rehabilitated under pressure and thrown back into a war that had only gotten worse while he was sidelined. The months he had spent fighting political accusations instead of Imperial fleets had cost the Republic irreplaceable time during which Thrawn had seized sectors, claimed the Katana fleet, and grown his clone army without facing the Republic's best strategic mind. Leia observed him during one of these briefings and saw what the campaign had done. His huge eyes were unusually heavy-lidded. His normal salmon color was noticeably faded. He was tired, desperately so. He was no longer the confident admiral who had planned the assault on the second Death Star. He was a commander grinding through a campaign designed specifically to exhaust him, and the numbers on the briefing screen confirmed it. 4 sectors lost in 5 days, 13 more on the edge. Convoys requiring escorts the fleet could not spare, territory contracting from every direction simultaneously, and the cloning facilities still running. The desperation of the Republic's position was visible in who it turned to for help. Talon Karrde, a smuggler, a criminal, a man who would spend his career avoiding exactly this kind of involvement, began reaching out to the galaxy's independent operators, coordinating with smuggling chiefs like Mazik, Parda, and Gillespie to rally whatever ships and crews they could bring to the fight. Karrde was trying to build a fighting force out of people whose entire profession was avoiding fights. These were not idealists or patriots. They were business people calculating whether the Empire or the Republic offered a better future for their operations. And the fact that the Republic's best recruitment pitch was desperation told them everything about which side was losing. At the same time, the smugglers understood something the Republic's politicians did not. If Thrawn won, the Empire that returned would have no use for independent operators. Every smuggler who helped the Republic was making a calculated bet that a weak, grateful democracy was a better business partner than a restored empire run by the most component strategists in the galaxy. On the Imperial side, the threat that concerned Pellaeon most was not the Republic. It was standing on the Chimera's bridge. During a fleet engagement earlier in the campaign, C'baoth had demonstrated exactly what he was capable of. Without warning, the clone had reached out through the Force and seized absolute control of the Chimera's crew. Every officer, every gunner, every technician on the bridge locked into paralysis at their stations. Their hands frozen on controls, they could no longer operate independently. C'baoth had directed the ship himself, through them, bending the crew's actions to his will as casually as a puppeteer pulling strings. The moment had lasted only seconds before Thrawn activated the Ysalamiri and cut the connection. But Pellaeon had seen enough. If C'baoth did that during the battle, the Chimera would not respond to its own officers. If he did it across multiple ships, the entire fleet could be paralyzed at the worst possible moment. And C'baoth's madness was getting worse. His obsession with Leia Organa Solo's twins had consumed everything else. He tolerated Thrawn's authority only as long as it served that obsession. The moment it stopped serving him, the most powerful asset in the Imperial fleet would become its most dangerous liability. Pellaeon's worst fear was internal, not external. That tells you everything about how close the Empire was to winning. No one in the galaxy believed anything could stop him. Chapter 7. The Fatal Variables. There were 3 things Thrawn could not control: and all three broke at the same time. The first was the Noghri. For decades, the Empire had maintained the loyalty of the Noghri, a species of lethal commando warriors from the planet Onager, by deliberately poisoning their home world, preventing its recovery from an ecological disaster, and presenting itself as the only source of aid. The Noghri served the Empire with absolute devotion. They were Thrawn's personal security force, his covert assassination teams, and the most trusted assets in his entire command structure. Leia Organa Solo traveled to Onager and discovered the deception, the chemical agents mixed into the very soil remediation compounds that were supposed to be healing the land. The Noghri had been tending fields treated with Imperial chemicals for a generation, watching their world fail to recover and thanking the Empire for trying. The aid shipments were part of the poison, not the cure. Everything the Noghri had believed about their benefactors was a lie, constructed to keep them dependent, grateful, and willing to kill on command. The land they thought was healing was being systematically prevented from recovering, a generational operation of deliberate ecological sabotage designed to ensure the Noghri never became independent enough to question their servitude. The Mitrak, the female clan leader, had challenged Thrawn's authority directly, invoking Noghri law that required a member of the Overclan accused of treason to be judged by the clan dynasts under their own ancient rules. Thrawn had dismissed her. He was not bound by Noghri law, he said. Imperial rules would apply. That moment, a Grand Admiral overriding a species-owned justice system to maintain control captured the entire relationship in a single exchange. The species' loyalty did not waver, it flipped. Completely, and with the kind of cold fury that only comes from learning you've been betrayed by the people you trusted most. Thrawn lost his personal guard, the commandos who would handle his most sensitive covert operations, from kidnapping attempts on Leia to assassination missions against Republic officers. He lost the security detail that protected him aboard his own flagship. He lost the intelligence network that the Noghri had built across dozens of worlds through years of quiet, lethal service. Operations that had depended on Noghri operatives, surveillance, extraction, infiltration, went dark overnight, and critically, he did not know the full extent of the defection until it was too late. The Noghri did not announce their change of allegiance. They did not confront Thrawn or issue demands. They simply stopped reporting and started waiting. The silence itself was the weapon. The second was C'baoth. His madness had been escalating throughout the campaign, and by the final phase, his agenda had narrowed to a single obsession: capturing Leia Organa Solo's twins and training them as his own Jedi. The war, the Empire, Thrawn's plans, all of it was secondary. Pellaeon had already witnessed what C'baoth could do to the Chimera's bridge crew, and the clone's power was only growing. He tolerated Thrawn's authority only as long as it served his own purpose. An asset with its own agenda is no longer an asset. It is a liability that activates at the worst possible moment. The third was Mount Tantus itself. The Republic discovered the location of the cloning facility, the source of Thrawn's renewable army, and launched a strike team to destroy it. Mara Jade, who had served the Emperor and knew the mountain's layout from her years as the Emperor's hand, led them to it. The destruction of the Sparty cylinders was the single most consequential military action of the entire campaign. Without them, Thrawn's exponential advantage disappeared overnight. The clone army that had been growing faster than the Republic could fight it was suddenly finite. Every soldier lost from that point forward was irreplaceable. The Empire returned to fighting with these same constraints as everyone else. Limited crews, limited reinforcements, limited time. The math had been the whole point, yet it reversed. The final battle came at Bilbringi, the Empire's primary shipyard and the linchpin of its fleet production capability. The Republic planned a major strike on the shipyard, hoping to cripple the Empire's ability to build and repair warships. Thrawn knew they were coming. Deltasaurus had given him advance warning, as it had for every Republic operation throughout the campaign. He had positioned his fleet to defend the shipyard and prepared a layered trap for the incoming Republic forces. The shipyards themselves were already heavily fortified. Asteroids clustered in the central sector provided natural cover, and the Imperial garrison had been reinforced with additional warships pulled from other sectors. Interdiction fields would prevent the Republic fleet from retreating to hyperspace once it arrived. The Republic fleet would arrive expecting a contested target. What it would find was a killing ground. Thrawn had spent the entire campaign converting intelligence advantages into tactical victories. Bilbringi should have been his masterpiece, the battle where Delta Source, fleet positioning, and tactical genius came together to break the Republic's offensive capability permanently. Every element was in place. The trap was set. But the variables had shifted in ways his intelligence network could not detect. Karrde's effort paid off at Bilbringi. Ships and crews that had not appeared in any Republic military planning session arrived in the battle, organized entirely outside the palace and outside Delta Source's range. These were the smuggling chiefs Karrde had been quietly rallying for weeks. Mazik, Parda, Gillespie, and others, bringing ships and firepower that Thrawn's intelligence had no way to anticipate because the recruitment had never passed through any system the Empire was monitoring. The Noghri defection had already compromised Thrawn's personal security in ways that no sensor sweep would reveal, and on the bridge of the Chimera, standing behind the Grand Admiral's command chair as he had for years, was Rook. Rook, a Noghri, had served as Thrawn's personal bodyguard throughout the entire campaign. From Sluice Vaughn to the convoy raids to the siege of Coruscant, he had watched Thrawn plan, command, and win, and had learned what the Empire had done to his world. He had stood behind that command chair through every victory, every tactical masterpiece, every moment when the Grand Admiral had seemed untouchable, and he had been waiting. He killed Thrawn on the bridge of the Chimera. The Grand Admiral, who had brought the New Republic to its knees, died at the hands of his own bodyguard in the middle of a battle he was winning because of a deception that had nothing to do with military strategy. The most dangerous mind in the galaxy was ended not by a fleet, not by a Jedi, not by any weapon the Republic had built, but by a single act of vengeance from a species Thrawn had trusted completely and the Empire had poisoned for a generation. Pellaeon, suddenly in command of a campaign that had been held together by a single mind, assessed the situation with the clarity of a career officer who understood exactly what had just been lost. No one else in the Imperial fleet thought the way Thrawn thought. No one studied art, no one predicted species psychology, no one designed operations that attacked an enemy's political structure and military capability and economic base simultaneously. The clone facility was destroyed. The Noghri had turned. C'baoth was spiraling into full madness. The fleet was intact, but the strategy that gave it purpose was gone. Pellaeon had spent years watching Thrawn turn inferior numbers into victories. He knew better than anyone that those victories had depended on one mind that could hold the entire campaign in focus, adjust every variable in real time, and keep a fractured empire fighting above its weight class through sheer cognitive superiority. And that mind was dead on the bridge floor. He ordered a retreat. Within days, the fleet that had been pressing the Republic across dozens of sectors began pulling back to defensible positions. Commanders who had followed Thrawn's orders with confidence now faced decisions they had never been trained to make independently. The campaign was over. The Republic outlasted the system Thrawn had built, and it did so by the narrowest of margins. Leia's diplomacy turned the Noghri, a strike team destroyed Mount Tantus, and a single act of revenge by a betrayed bodyguard ended the most dangerous military campaign the New Republic had ever faced. If Rook had not acted, if the Noghri had remained loyal, if Mount Tantus had held for another 6 months, or if C'baoth had maintained enough sanity to stay useful without becoming a liability, Thrawn might have finished what he started. Any one of those variables holding steady could have been enough. The Republic had no counter to his strategy. It had no commander who can match him. It had no intelligence service that could penetrate his plans. Everything that saved the Republic came from outside Thrawn's campaign. From the personal loyalty of a species he had exploited, from the insider knowledge of a woman the Emperor trained, and from the moral cost of a deception that had lasted a generation. The New Republic would have fallen to a strategist with a cloning facility and a deeper understanding of his enemies than they had of themselves, with no superweapon required. That is how close it came, and that is why, decades later, when people in this galaxy speak Thrawn's name, there is still fear in the word. Thrawn came closer to breaking the New Republic than any force since Endor, through patience, information, and a cloning facility buried under a mountain. But the galaxy he nearly conquered would not stay quiet for long, and the next threat was already taking shape beyond the Outer Rim. Thrawn was not the only dangerous man in the galaxy. The Sith have existed for thousands of years, and not all of them were created equal. The Acolytes who never survived their first trial, to Dark Lords who consumed entire planets. Every rank and what it took to reach them is broken down in our full Sith hierarchy breakdown. And even further back, before the Sith, before the dark side even had a name, the complete origin of the ancient Jedi is traced in our deep dive into the dawn of the Order.
So that was Thrawn's campaign, how he nearly broke the New Republic. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Seriously, this was a fantastic story on how Grand Admiral Thrawn resurrected the Empire, instilled so much fear, and also being betrayed by his most trusted bodyguard for killing him because he enslaved his bodyguard's people. Seriously, I never saw that coming. But, you know, the story is what it is and was fantastic. Here are a few factors about Grand Admiral Thrawn and his bodyguard. Grand Admiral Thrawn is the most dangerous villain in the Star Wars galaxy because he is a non-force sensitive tactical genius who defeats his enemies before the fight even begins. While Sith Lords rely on fear and raw power, Thrawn relies on intellect, psychological warfare, and a deep understanding of enemy cultures. Seriously, this is a guy that you don't want to mess with. And here is about his bodyguard. Grand Admiral Thrawn was defeated due to betrayal by his own Nogri bodyguard, Rook, who discovered the Empire had enslaved his people. Rook assassinated Thrawn during the Battle of Bulbringi, causing the Imperial forces to instantly fracture without their military genius at the helm. I wouldn't blame him. But, as I said, this was a fantastic story. And a word of wisdom for today. Use both your instincts and your tactics to overcome defeat. Have a blessed day further, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.